Shortly after 11 a.m. on the 13th of June 1917, London came under attack. Not at night, not by Zeppelin, but in broad daylight. High above the city, a formation of German bombers was already overhead, flying at an altitude few British aircraft could reach, and beyond the effective range of many of the guns below. They moved towards the capital almost unchallenged. Within minutes, bombs began to fall. Across London, people stopped, looked up, and tried to understand what they were seeing, because for 9 months there had been no raids. The Zeppelins had disappeared. The threat, it seemed, had passed, which is why, when those aircraft first appeared over the city, many assumed they were British. In East Ham, Florence Clark was sitting in a cookery lesson at school. In the city, Thomas Burke was at work on Fenchurch Street. At Liverpool Street Station, passengers moved through the platforms, and just off Old Street, Police Constable Alfred Smith walked his beat. There was no warning system, no sirens, no expectation of attack, and in the minutes that followed, London would experience something entirely new. In those first moments, there was confusion. The aircraft were clearly visible in the sky, flying in formation, steady and deliberate. But to those watching from the ground, there was nothing to suggest they were hostile. There had been no warning, no official alert of any kind. And when the first anti-aircraft guns began to fire, the response only added to the uncertainty. Shell bursts appeared in the sky, but they were too low, far below the aircraft themselves. For many, it still wasn't clear what was happening. Then the bombs began to land. Not on a single target, but across the city. In streets, in factories, at railway stations, and only then did it become unmistakable. London was under attack. To understand how it was left this exposed, we need to step back. During the previous year, Zeppelin airships had carried out a series of raids against Britain, targeting London and other areas. These vast machines had the advantage of endurance and range, but they also had weaknesses, and by late 1916, those weaknesses were being exploited. In September and October, 4 Zeppelins were destroyed while attempting to attack the capital. It was a significant blow, not only materially but psychologically. Those losses were too high, and the raids were suspended. Through the remainder of 1916 and into the first half of 1917, London experienced no further attacks. It appeared, at least on the surface, that the threat had been dealt with. But for Germany, the strategic importance of London had not changed. It remained the political centre of the British Empire, a focal point of industry and administration, and a target whose symbolic value far exceeded its physical destruction. If Zeppelins could no longer deliver that blow effectively, then another method would have to be found. That method came in the form of a new aircraft, the Gotha bomber. From the very beginning of the war, Germany had considered using aeroplanes to strike London. As early as 1914, a specialised unit, the Breiftaubenabteilung Ostend, had been formed with that intention. But the aircraft available at the time lacked the range to reach London unless forward bases could be secured on the French coast. When those advances failed to materialise, the plan was postponed rather than abandoned. By 1917, the situation had changed, and it created a problem Britain had not yet solved. The German air service now possessed a new category of aircraft known as the Großkampfflugzeug, or large combat aircraft. Among these, the Gotha 4 stood out as a machine capable of carrying out the mission that had previously been impossible. It was a large twin-engine biplane crewed by 3 men. In the nose sat the commander, who acted as navigator, observer, bomb aimer and forward gunner. Behind him were the pilot and rear gunner. Powered by 2 260 horsepower engines, the aircraft could reach speeds of around 80 miles per hour and operate at significant altitude. It could carry a bomb load of roughly 300 kilograms, a substantial payload for the time. The man selected to organise and lead this new effort was Hauptmann Ernst Brandenburg. Originally an infantry officer, Brandenburg had been wounded during the war and subsequently transferred into the air service. His abilities as an organiser and leader quickly became apparent, and by 1917 he had attracted the attention of senior command. At the age of just 33, he was given a task that had no precedent: to build, train and command a bomber force capable of striking London. The operation was given the name Türkenkreuz. Brandenburg effectively started with a blank slate. There were no manuals for long-range bombing operations over the sea, no established doctrine for formation flying in daylight over hostile territory, and no tested methods for navigation across open waters of the North Sea. Everything had to be developed from first principles. Crews trained intensively, learning to fly in tight formation as a means of mutual protection and to navigate accurately using limited visual references. The unit that emerged from this process was officially designated Kampfgeschwader 3, abbreviated to Cargo 3. Though among its crews it was more commonly known as the Englandgeschwader, the England Squadron. Its purpose was clear and singular, to carry the war to London. By late May 1917, Brandenburg judged that his force was ready to attempt its first mission. On the 25th of May, the squadron crossed the North Sea and approached the English coast. But as they neared London, they encountered heavy cloud cover that obscured the city. Without clear visibility, accurate bombing was impossible, and Brandenburg made the decision to turn away. Instead, bombs were dropped on targets in Kent, particularly around Folkestone and the Shorncliffe military camp. The result was devastating. 95 people were killed and 195 injured. A second attempt followed on the 5th of June. Once again, the formation reached England but was forced to abandon the attack on London due to weather conditions. Again, bombs were dropped elsewhere. Although the capital had been spared, the threat was now unmistakable. At the same time, Britain's defensive posture had shifted in a way that would prove dangerously inadequate. With no sustained raids for several months, resources had been redirected towards the Western Front. Aircraft and pilots assigned to home defence were transferred, and anti-aircraft guns were reduced in number. More significantly, in March 1917, a decision had been taken to restrict anti-aircraft fire over inland areas, including London. The reasoning behind this decision lay in the difficulty of identifying targets' altitude, the waste of ammunition, and the damage caused by falling shell fragments. But whatever the logic, the effect was clear. London's air defences had been weakened at precisely the moment when a new threat was emerging. On the morning of the 13th of June 1917, the conditions that had previously prevented an attack were finally favourable. The skies were clear, visibility was good, and Brandenburg decided to proceed. At 10 a.m, 20 Gotha bombers took off from airfields in Ghent in Belgium. 2 were forced to turn back due to mechanical problems, but the remaining aircraft formed up and headed west across the North Sea. As they flew, the crews experienced a sense of confidence. One commander later recalled the atmosphere within the formation. "We can recognise the men in the machines flying nearest to us, and signals and greetings are exchanged. A feeling of absolute security and indomitable confidence in our success are our predominant emotions." As the formation approached the English coast, one aircraft broke away to carry out a diversionary attack on Margate. British fighters responded to this threat, pursuing the lone bomber and effectively removing themselves from the path of the main formation. Meanwhile, the remaining Gothas continued inland. As they crossed the coastline, another crew member described the moment. "We noticed our comrades and other machines pointing to the coastline. They nod at each other and seem highly enthusiastic. We pass the cloud bank, and through the hazy veil the mouth of the Thames appears." The River Thames provided a clear and unmistakable guide towards London. At 10:50 a.m, reports of aircraft approaching the Thames estuary triggered the alarm. Orders were issued to scramble aircraft and prepare anti-aircraft defences, but the response was already behind the pace of events. Many British aircraft struggled to climb to the altitude of the incoming bombers, which were flying at around 16,000 feet. When the anti-aircraft guns opened fire, their shells burst below the Gothas, failing to reach their targets. One German crew described the scene as they approached the city. "Suddenly there stand, as if by magic, here and there in our course, little clouds of cotton wool, the greetings of enemy guns. They multiply with astonishing rapidity. We fly through them and leave the suburbs behind us. It's the heart of London that must be hit." Moments later, the bombs began to fall. In East Ham, Florence Clark was watching from her classroom window. She later recalled, "I saw what appeared to be at first a large flock of silver birds. We all stood watching the aeroplanes and saw a black object fall from amongst the crowd of them. There was a terrible explosion. Then we realised it was an air raid." The bomb she saw struck her home. When she returned, she found it destroyed, and her mother and 4-year-old brother had been killed. As the formation reached central London, Brandenburg gave the signal and the aircraft began to release their bombs. One German commander described the moments in stark terms. "In less time than it takes to tell you, I have pushed the levers. I anxiously follow the flight of the released bombs. With a tremendous crash, they strike the heart of England. It's a magnificently terrific spectacle, while below the earth seems to be rocking and houses disappearing in craters and conflagration." Across the city, destruction spread rapidly. At Liverpool Street Station, bombs smashed through the glass roof, striking trains and igniting fires that spread through the carriages. 16 people were killed and many more injured. Among those present was poet Siegfried Sassoon, who later reflected on the experience. In a trench, one was acclimatized to the notion of being exterminated, and there was a sense of organized retaliation. But here one was helpless. An invisible enemy sent destruction spinning down from a fine weather sky. Poor old men bought a railway ticket and were trundled away dead on a barrow. Elsewhere, similar scenes unfolded. At Fenchurch Street, Thomas Burke witnessed the aftermath of a bomb strike on his building. He described what he saw. Looking out onto a street enveloped in the rising dust and debris, excited shouts of "Come and keep in!" A girl who'd been in the doorway of a shop having lost both her legs, an unknown man lying dead against the wall of a shop opposite, a small cat mewing piteously with its fur blown away. On Central Street, Police Constable Alfred Smith heard the explosions and saw a group of workers rushing from a building in panic. As he stepped forward to stop them, 2 bombs exploded nearby. Smith was killed instantly, along with 12 others in the street. The workers he had attempted to restrain survived, but the most devastating moment of the raid occurred in Poplar, at the Upper North Street School. A bomb struck the building during the school day, passing through multiple floors before detonating among the classrooms of young children. The destruction was catastrophic. Witnesses described the aftermath in harrowing detail. Many of the little ones were lying across their desks, apparently dead and with terrible wounds on heads and limbs, and scores of others were writhing in pain and moaning pitifully. Many of the bodies were mutilated, but our first thought was to get to the injured. Another recalled, "The corridors filled with men and women frantically searching for their children. All were screaming and shouting." Outside, a witness described what they saw. There were some ghastly sights. Portions of 9 boys and girls were carried out. All that was left of one was covered by the card which tells of the school routine for the day. By the time the attack ended, 18 children had been killed at the school alone. In total, the raid lasted less than 20 minutes, but in that time 162 people were killed and 426 injured, making it the deadliest air raid Britain had experienced up to that point. The Gotha bombers then turned east and made their way back across the North Sea, largely unchallenged by British defences. The impact of the raid was immediate and profound. Material damage was significant, but the psychological effect was far greater. For the first time, London had been struck by a coordinated daylight bombing attack carried out by aeroplanes. This was not an isolated experiment or a limited raid. It represented a fundamental shift in the nature of warfare. The British response was swift. A new command structure, the London Air Defence Area, was established to coordinate the defence of the capital. Improvements were made in aircraft capability, anti-aircraft tactics and communication systems. Over time, these changes reduced the effectiveness of German bombing operations. By late 1917, losses among the Gotha units had increased to the point where daylight raids became too dangerous, forcing a transition to night bombing. Despite the casualties and destruction, the raids failed to achieve their ultimate objective. Civilian morale in London did not collapse. The population adapted, endured, and continued to function under the threat of further attacks. Today, little physical evidence remains of the destruction caused on that June morning. Much of it was erased during the Second World War or lost through redevelopment. Yet the memory of the raid endures. Memorials to those who died, including Constable Alfred Smith and the children of the Poplar School, serve as reminders of what happened that day. The events of 13th of June 1917 marked a turning point. They demonstrated that distance no longer guaranteed safety, and that the front line of war could extend far beyond the battlefield. In that sense, the Gotha raid on London was not just an episode in the First World War. It was a glimpse of the future of warfare in the 20th century. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, why not check out our dedicated First World War podcast, Not So Quiet on the Western Front, where each week my co-host Dr. Spencer Jones and I explore episodes just like this from throughout the conflict. Check it out right here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. That's all this time. We'll see you again soon.